You're up.
Okay, Commissioner, this meeting is now live. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and good morning and welcome to this meeting of the Strategic Policing and Crime Board on Tuesday 25th of January 2022 at 10 a.m. My name's Simon Foster and I'm the West Midlands Police and Crime Commissioner, and I'm joined this morning by members of the board, the Chief Constable, police officers and staff, and representatives of the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. There are times attached to the agenda items, and I'll be having regard to these in the interests of an effective and efficient meeting and to ensure that we complete the meeting within the allocated time. If during the course of the meeting people want to contribute at appropriate times, then please raise your digital hand and I'll bring you into the meeting as soon as I'm able to do so. Agenda item 1 is apologies and Police and Crime Commissioner update. We have apologies from Deputy Chief Constable Vanessa Jardine, Assistant Chief Constable Mia, Assistant Chief Constable Matt Ward, Chief Superintendent Dave Sturman, and Assistant Police and Crime Commissioner Tom McNeil. Are there any other apologies that people are aware of? I don't see anybody indicating, so I'll assume we have no other apologies. I have 3 matters in relation to my Police and Crime Commissioner update. Firstly, I'd like to begin by praising the efforts of West Midlands Police in keeping our streets safe. In 2021, officers recovered a total of 132 viable firearms, including sawn-off shotguns, pistols and revolvers, plus a stash of ammunition. This is a reminder not only of the dangerous but vital work the police do, but also that the ongoing challenge of gun crime remains. Intelligence work, such as that carried out by the National Ballistics Intelligence Service, is crucial to understanding the threat and risk, and there'll be no let-up in the constant and unremitting action that's required to prevent and tackle gun crime in 2022, so as to keep the people and communities of the West Midlands safe and secure. Secondly, I'd like to place on record my appreciation, admiration and thanks for the work carried out by the highly skilled police officers and staff of West Midlands Police during the course of the siege in Coventry. At all times, they kept the safety and welfare of the 8-year-old boy at the forefront of their minds. And it was as a consequence of their determination, patience and professionalism that I'm pleased and relieved to say they were able to bring what was a dangerous situation to a safe conclusion. I'd also like to extend my gratitude to the people of Earlsdon, who were so supportive and understanding throughout what was a very difficult time. I'm pleased to say that thanks to West Midlands Police's resolution of this incident, people in the area have now been able to return to normality and get on with their busy lives. And then finally, last week I held my annual business summit and met with dozens of businesses from the West Midlands to encourage firms to employ former offenders who have served their time. One effective way to break the cycle of crime and ensure former offenders are able to make a positive contribution to society is for them to be able to access productive employment. I'm delighted so many firms agreed to take part in the summit. My intention is to encourage as many of them as possible to appreciate that people with a criminal record can make great employees and need a second chance. We all benefit from rehabilitation. It's a win-win. Agenda item 2, notes of the last meeting, which was on Tuesday, 21st of December 2021. Are there any matters arising from the notes of the last meeting, please? I don't see anybody indicating, so I will take it that those notes of the last meeting are then agreed. Agenda item 3 is questions from members of the public. And we have 2 questions from members of the public this morning. The first question is from Brendan Connor. Brendan is actually with us this morning, and Brendan has a particularly important question in view of the Commonwealth Games this summer, that we have agenda items on both the Games and the strategic policing requirement this morning, and there is currently planning underway for a regional seminar on the role of police and crime commissioners in the event of a major incident. Brendan, would you like to ask your question, please?
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Chief Constable. Good morning, if it's not too late in January. Happy New Year to you all. My question really relates to an issue that I discussed with the previous Commissioner and Chief Constable, and it concerns the planning and preparation in the hopefully unlikely event of a major incident similar to the Manchester Arena event, and the coordination of the 3 emergency services. So the formal question is as follows. In the light of the evidence given to the Manchester Arena inquiry concerning the lack of coordination and preparedness of the 3 emergency services responses on the night, would the Chief Constable set out, A, what arrangements have been agreed with his counterparts in the fire service and ambulance service to ensure a coordinated response? Secondly, whether the primacy of command by police has been accepted by the fire and ambulance services. C, whether any arrangements have been live tested with the 3 emergency services in the West Midlands. And finally, whether the new events control suite has been integrated into the planning for the Commonwealth Games.
So it's good to see you again, Brendan. Thank you for the question. I know this is an area you picked up before, and it is a very important one for us. So the first thing to say is just at a national level, obviously the response to what is a marauding terrorism attack that people will talk about and refer to is being extensively explored through the Manchester inquiry, and we expect the Part 2 report to look in more detail at that specifically. But we haven't been waiting for that, clearly. We've been very keen to learn the lessons around it. So after a number of events, the guidance and operating procedures for how to deal with an MTA were revised by the 3 services under the JESIP principles, the Joint Emergency Service Planning, and issued by Counter-Terrorism Policing, and they are a standard that the inspectorate inspectors on. When those principles were released, the 3 chiefs of the blue light agencies wrote to all our commanders to set out very clearly the expectations around the new JOPS principles. They are somewhat different in that they have what I would describe as a bias to action has been strengthened as a result of the learning from Manchester, where some agencies held back. That was issued across to all those commanders. There have been extensive testing, and those continue at pace for the Commonwealth Games, and that is ongoing at the moment. But we have also done a review, which was held by a senior representative from the ambulance service, but also myself and the Chief Fire Officer reviewed the progress by all 3 agencies through our exercises to date, and areas where we need to continue to strengthen and tighten them. And that has been the focus of some of our planning of the Commonwealth Games. So the governance from the 3 chiefs, in my view, has been robust. It has been explicit, and we have been testing and reviewing the progress as we move through that. And indeed, between myself and the Chief Fire Officer, certainly good examples of us witnessing and observing those exercises in practice. The final issue then is around the new event control suite. We've extensively published, in fact, that's where I am today, our new C3 command control coordination site that has been built to ensure the public of West Midlands have a police facility that can command a large-scale major incident and large-scale planned events like the Commonwealth Games. The ECS is being extensively tested for such a scenario, both in terms of games and beyond, and lots of learning being developed to ensure the room mobilises at the right pace and command and control can be transferred during such an incident. So final issue is this area is subject to inspection by HMIC FRS, and actually particular attention has been paid to those inspections when they're received, which are national ones, and we'll develop the learning. This is a very challenging scenario. Forces and blue light agencies have one chance to get this right, and the best way of ensuring we do that is constant focus and constant testing and clarity of expectations, and I think we have that in place here in the region.
Thank you very much for that response, Chief Constable, and thank you very much, Brendan, for putting that question. It's much appreciated. Moving then on to the second question from the public. That is from a David Page. David is not with us this morning, and so I will ask the question on his behalf. And David's question is, the policing plan 2021 to 2025 refers to police performance information and information on stop and search being easily available for the public to access, with statements on transparency and in particular for local communities having trust and confidence in Westminster Police and yourself. The lack of such information, especially local crimes, can lead to rumours that crime is up and the real picture is being hidden. Historically, crimes information for Neighbourhood Watch and other partners could be easily obtained from the National Police website. The website states, undated, West Midlands Police, due to recent major system changes, the force is unable to provide crime and stop and search data from April 2021 onwards. The force aims to rectify this issue as soon as possible in the coming months. On the 28th of September 2021, DCC Vanessa Jardine reported to the board there has been some challenge whilst the system has fully embedded. The adoption period is now over. The force is using Connect and Control works as part of business as usual. Why then is there no data for crimes for your local area by postcode or name, and stop and search available to the general public since 1st of April 2021 on the National Police website? Note checked on 30th of January 2021 before submission. When will the information be made available to the public? Was the Commissioner aware of this failure to provide the information? Chief Constable, before I respond to this, could you please kindly update the board as to the current position in response to David Page's question, please?
Yes, thank you. So it's a very good and fair question. The police.uk system, I think, is intended to ensure the public can have a good understanding of crime in their area. We think it's very important the public do have that. And there have been difficulties around supplying that information from West Midlands Police. The reason for that, as stated in the question, is the force changed its crime, custody, case management and intelligence system into the Connect system, which is a very large, I describe as generational change in the force's information technology. Connect is a system that is available to many other forces in the United Kingdom, and we've moved across to that. The challenge of that then is that obviously we need to then ensure that the data extracts move from ourselves to the supply of Connect and that they are put into national systems. And there are a number of those that our data has to service. Operationally, the PND, which is an important tool that's used nationally. We've also then got the crime data the Home Office needs, and also then police.uk. So in terms of the police.uk, which is where the question is, we have overcome the challenges in terms of submission, and we are already loading data onto the system now, and that should start to be visible to the public later next month in February. We have done work around manual extracts during this time. We've been able to provide to the Home Office, so we've not reduced our overall crime reporting into national data. We've been doing that manually, but we are in the position where the police.uk data extract will start happening now as well. There are also have been some changes to stop search data that have taken place, and again that will be visible. There will be some changes on this later next month, and we will see that visible, I think, during the rest of this financial year. So it has been very challenging. It is a big generational change. We've been able to carry on reporting our data into crime data for the Home Office, but the police.uk data issue should be resolved now into February.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. Insofar as the question is addressed to myself, this is a matter of legitimate public concern, and it's a matter that is of concern to me. Connect went live in April 2021. The inability to provide data nationally was reported to me on the 5th of July 2021 and was apparently the result of a formatting incompatibility. At the time, it was understood that additional server capacity would address the difficulty. The Chief Finance Officer of the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner was tasked with monitoring the issue. It was reported that manual workarounds would allow the data to be provided and published. At that time, it was suggested that 2/4 of data would be affected. I have raised the issue with the Chief Constable again on the 15th of November 2021 and 29th of November 2021. And I'm grateful to the Chief Constable for providing the further update this morning, and indeed the timescale that he has referred to in the response to his question is helpful and reassuring. But I can assure people that I will continue to keep this matter under review until it is finally resolved. Moving then on to agenda item 4, which is questions from board members. We have 4 questions from members of the board this morning, and we'll take those questions one at a time. The first 2 questions are from board member Councillor Bhupinder Garkal. Would you like to ask your first question, please, Bhupinder?
Thank you, Commissioner. Good morning, and good morning, Chief. Could the Chief Constable share any information in regards to drink driving incidents over the Christmas and New Year period? If so, are the incidents higher or lower than previous years? Thank you.
So thank you for the question. As you can imagine, that Christmas and New Year are an area where we pay attention, but we do it as part of a national campaign. We always try and educate people, but clearly targeted action is quite important around this. So if we describe the seasonal period for the December 21 campaign, there were 62 positive tests for drink and drugs, 38 were for drink, 24 for drugs. That was a positive test rate of 7.5% of all tests conducted. In terms of, there were also, of those tests, of the total of tests, there were 5.3% of those were ones where people refused. And again, there are a number of tests refused around drugs, which again, as you probably were, we can prosecute with people refuse to provide. The figures are, compared to last year, we conducted a slightly slightly higher amount of tests. So we did, in terms of breath tests, 755 compared to 466 last year. In terms of drugs tests, we increased those from 69 to 52. But actually, as a percentage that tested positive, the numbers that tested positive were lower this year. So we did more enforcement activity to check. Our numbers have increased considerably on breath tests conducted, but the numbers that actually have tested positive are a little lower this year as a percentage overall.
Thank you for that response, Chief Constable. Bhupinder, would you like to ask your second question, please?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Can the Chief Constable detail the impacts and implications Home Office crime recording rules are having on Westminster Police and the pressure it puts upon the force's limited resources, please? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a really good question. It's an area that has been receiving a lot of attention by the force. So Westminster Police are graded as good in terms of our crime recording accuracy. That is a grade that's given by HMIC FRS, and it's based upon not just classification, but actually the number of crimes that we would spot and see in a particular incident. We know that accurate crime data is extremely important to the public. The Public Administration Committee did a review in 2014 and raised concerns over under-recording by forces, and as a result, tighter crime data standards were put in place, and also now crime data is managed by the Office of National Statistics. So as you can imagine, there is some incredibly important work that we need to make sure crime is accurate. There has been a change over the years in a number of ways, though, crime is recorded, and particularly a desire to ensure that we now crime to investigate rather than investigate to crime. And what I mean by that is, in the past, an allegation would be made, we would investigate, and then during the investigation decide what crimes have been committed. Today, the recordings encourage a mindset, which I think is right, of believing the victim at the start, and so we will crime based upon victim's allegation and belief, and then investigate and then determine subsequently where we feel the crime is. That has a position where it leads us to record more than we used to at the front end, but while that's absolutely fine and positive while we carry investigations and counters, I think, some of the issues we've seen in the past where some complainants may not have been believed, there is a robust process then that follows to cancel crimes should the investigation challenge the initial crime decision. I have to say my concern is the standards to cancel crimes at that point are extremely high, and as a result can result in crimes remaining in the system recorded as crimes because the police cannot provide the standard of evidence to negate it as a crime. And I think that can have a direct impact upon the data we've got. It also means those crimes remain held against potentially people who are subject of allegations as being an offender, where on the balance of probability the police do not feel that crime it has been recorded. There are the potentially over-recording of crime issues does have a risk because they enter the crime system, they are the information we use to assess patterns and trends, and that can be extremely difficult in terms of ensuring information is reliable. The final issue is that HMRC FRS test on crime recording whether the right number of crimes are recorded per incident, and this has been quite a change. So it is now quite common to see not just the principal offence recorded when an incident happens, but numerous other offences that might have been exhibited. And I think that creates a significant challenge with the volume of crimes recording, many of which are never going to be detected in the future, which has an impact on our kind of performance data around outcomes. These areas often affect the violent crime data. A great amount of violent crime isn't about physical injury, it's about allegations of harassment, alarm, and those types of crimes, I think, have increased as a result of these crime recording standards. The final thing to say is about crime recording. Every crime that we have to assess the risk to the victim, assess the level of investigation we take, and that all takes time. So the final summary issue I would say is it is absolutely right we have accurate crime data. It is the right thing to have a mindset of believing victims and recording crimes to investigate them. But it has to be balanced with an appropriate level of controls to ensure crimes can then be cancelled if there is strong evidence crimes have not taken place, because it cannot be in the public interest to ensure these crimes are recorded. And a proportionate approach needs to be taken to the amount of crimes recorded per incident. The police need to concentrate on the principal crimes that are being recorded. There is a danger that more things are being recorded that actually potentially undermine the ability to respond effectively. But I'd end by saying it is important to have clear standards, and it is important where standards exist the force follows them, and that's the approach that we're taking.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable, for that response, and thank you very much for your 2 questions, Bhupinder. So we now have questions 3 and 4 from board member Kath Hannon. I know that Kath was having some difficulty joining the call. I'm not sure whether she is actually online at the moment.
It doesn't look like it, Commissioner.
Thanks very much, Chief Executive, for confirming that, in which case I will ask the questions on behalf of Kath, and hopefully she'll have an opportunity to join us once you've resolved any technical issues that she's having. So question 3 from the board is, can the Chief Constable describe how Westlands Police is improving its compliance with the Victims Code? Chief Constable.
Thank you, Commissioner. This is very important. The successive governments have sought to improve the clarity of victims' rights, and particularly through the code and also statutory intervention. So, Assistant Chief Constable Claire Bell heads the Victim Code Service Delivery Group. She acts as a lead senior officer as Victims Champion, and she has a number of people across different parts of the force to oversee the delivery and performance against the Victims Code. We constantly update the force in terms of national guidance, good practice and updates. We do monthly audits and compliance and look at areas for underperformance or good practice. We do training and refresher work through the group she leads, and also we can raise issues up to the local groups like the local Criminal Justice Board, where performance is more broad ranging. All departments of the force are represented at the victim-wide Victims Code Champions Group, and we ensure that all the information is disseminated through the overall strategic group there as well. And finally, we do some bespoke Victims Code training delivered to single points of contact, which is an adaptation of the training provided to new recruits, and we'll be providing that and cascading that through the force in the work we're doing. The work, as you know, is jointly tied into the work that is going on with the Victims Commission, and aligns with the work of your policy officers. And we do specifically, I think, have concentrated on parts of the force where we need improvement plans. So as you can imagine, the Public Protection Unit and our Force AID department that deal with the bulk of victims have their own specific plans because they have more engagement with the code as well. There's more information in the report I've got at the moment. The final thing I'd say also is we sample this from the public, not just case review. So we do SMS surveys, which have been initially focused on our contact and response teams, but they are moving out now in the next few months into our Force AID department, and the SMS surveys will provide a very good way of getting feedback from victims on whether we're meeting the code.
Thank you very much for that response, Chief Constable. So moving on to the fourth question from the board, and Kath Hannon's second question. Can the Chief Constable describe the improvements made to the victim personal statement process which have increased the number of victim personal statements presented in court hearings?
Yes, thank you. So again, this is an important area. Victim personal statements are the opportunity for the victim's voice to be heard in court proceedings and the determination of what should take place in a particular case by the victim being able to put forward their version of experience. There has been a new go-to guide app that's been made available on officers' mobile devices and on force desktops that offers officers and staff help and guidance around how to do this. And it has a good summary of key information and specific advice to help people. Our witness care unit are currently working at 85.46% of victims' personal statements going before court, which is good progress. Our hate, crime and sexual assaults are working at 100% of cases going to court with victims' personal statements, and other cases are range from between 79 to 86%, depending upon the month where we are. We are constantly trying to improve this area. As you can imagine, we have paid particular attention to crimes with extremely high personal impact, such as hate and sexual offences. Our victims' care are constantly dip sampling cases to look at the quality of them to try and improve them. So there is some good progress in this area. We put a lot of work in place. We're prioritising where we put them, but we think this is very important, and hence the level of monitoring in place in the force.
Thank you very much for that response, Chief Constable. Four very important questions there, and welcome your responses. Agenda item 5 is the National Ballistics Intelligence Service annual report. This item is to be presented by Chief Superintendent Joanne Clues. We're asking that presentations on this occasion are please kept to 5 minutes, on the assumption that board members have all had the opportunity to read the paper. It's available to members of the public to read, and so as to maximise the opportunity for questions and discussion of the issues arising from the report. Could you please kindly present your report, Chief Superintendent? I think we seem to have, I can see you, Chief Superintendent, but I don't think we can hear you for some reason.
I think she's logged in, Commissioner, bear with.
Okay, looks like we're having some difficulty accessing sound from Chief Superintendent Clues.
Can you hear me, Commissioner?
Oh, there you go.
I think we can.
Sorry,
Right.
I wasn't on. I think it's a microphone setting that was causing the problems. Apologies for that. Okay,
No,
so
thank
I will.
you. It's good to have you here. So yes, please proceed with your report. Thank you for persevering.
Thank you very much. I will try and keep this brief and really try and pull out the highlights of the report. The purpose of the paper is to provide yourself reassurance that Nabis is performing efficiently and effectively, and also is supporting the fact that the collaboration agreement that we have with police forces is operating effectively. Now, Nabis, as you know, has been operational for over a decade now and supports UK law enforcement at a regional, national and international level. We are a national unit and we operate to support all forces. And the West Midlands PCC is the National Firearms lead on behalf of the APCC, and we're really grateful for the support that we've had over the years. In terms of the West Midlands PCC's office, Chief Executive represents the office at the Nabis Governance Board, and that's the governance board that holds us to account on financial and operational activity. So in relation to Nabis and what we do, we have two forensic hubs, one in Manchester and one in Birmingham, and they examine items from crime scenes, that's either a firearm or a fragment of ammunition, and try and make linkages with those items with other incidents that have taken place. We link very closely with three other ballistic forensic hubs, one held by the Metropolitan Police Service, one held by the Scottish Police Authority, and one with the Police Service of Northern Ireland. What we do importantly is pull in the intelligence from all five of those UK forensic ballistic hubs to actually make some analytical assessment around the overall intelligence in relation to the criminal use of firearms. Now, West Midlands Police act as the lead host force for Nabis, and we have Greater Manchester Police also support our forensic hub up in Manchester. And as I've already said, that's all detailed within the Section 22A of the Police Act Collaboration Agreement. As the host force, WMP provide critical support to Nabis from enabling departments such as finance, human resources, IT and digital, estates and security. The Nabis Central Hub is co-located with the West Midlands Police Forensics Department, which again provides that fast time ballistic forensics to be possible because we work very, very closely with the staff at that particular hub. Analytical support provided by the Nabis Intelligence Cell, again, have very effective working relationships with both WMP and the ROCU analysts and intelligence staff. Moving on to broadly across the UK, I think it's important to remember that criminal use of firearms accounts for a very small proportion of overall crime rates. However, the harm is disproportionate. The recent ONS stats recorded offences involving firearms actually decreased by 6% in the year ending June 2021. And we believe that an element of that is attributable to the national lockdowns that we had during that period of time. The Nabis reporting discharges are based on the items that we have actually examined. So they differ slightly from the ONS statistics. But again, we have demonstrated that we've seen a peak in 2018-19 of offences. However, over recent years, they have levelled off and reduced slightly over the last 2 years in terms of overall numbers. The types of firearms that are being used in criminal use of firearms offences, self-loading pistols and shotguns continue to be the most common firearms type. However, converted firearms continue to be a threat to UK policing. In particular, a recent trend that we've seen is top venting blank firing pistols that can be legally imported into the UK, then being converted to be able to fire live rounds of ammunition. In November 2018, the NCA Director General required all forces to improve their contribution to national intelligence requirements relating to firearms. And Nabis have been doing a lot of work to support that requirement and have identified some elements that hinder that efficient, effective response, being what we're calling a recovery gap and a submissions lag. The recovery gap being the gap between a firearms discharge and actual ballistic material being recovered from that scene, and the submissions lag being the time that it takes for those items to be submitted for a forensic examination. And there have been some updated requirements from forces in relation to those timings. In relation to the Nabis service delivery, the number of discharges and firearms offences is directly related to the number of submissions that we see in the hubs. What's interesting over recent years is that the average number of items for examination for each incident has been increasing over recent years. So the assumption we can make from that is we are getting better at recovering more items from incidents, or either that or there are further discharges or multiple discharges taking place at the same incident. Nabis operates within a memorandum of understanding between us and forces that details the expectations of forces and, importantly, the expectations of Nabis, specifically around forensic turnaround times. From April 21 to August 21, the Nabis achieved 100% compliance across the most urgent 2-day and 7-day turnaround, and the 28-day turnaround achieved a 67% compliance, which is an improvement on the previous year. Recent work within Nabis conducting end-to-end reviews have identified opportunities to increase efficiencies at both hubs. At the moment, they are very, very reliant on paperwork and duplication of entries, which takes a lot of time to complete. We've identified an interim solution to use a simple electronic case management system, which has been approved and is progressing in terms of build. However, in the long term, the Nabis database needs to be replaced, which is our IT system that we predominantly use. In relation to the Nabis database, we've been working with the Home Office, who have conducted some scoping around a proposed new database that was funded through the Home Office and is now subject of a joint bid for funding through spending review, and we're just awaiting the outcome of that funding bid. The Nabis Intelligence Cell analyses all of the hub reports from the 5 UK forensic ballistic hubs and prepares a number of intelligence products throughout the year. We work really closely with the National Crime Agency and the Home Office in particular in identifying opportunities for both enforcement and proactive work at a local, regional, national and international level. And we have been undertaking work overseas to influence legislative and manufacturing changes to reduce threats back within the UK. We've got a Nabis performance team that supports development of dashboards that allow us to look at our internal performance, but similarly provide additional data out to forces to see how they are complying with the MOU. However, again, we are challenged with some of the data issues within the Nabis database. We've got a number of 3 force liaison officers that again liaise very closely with forces to support that work. And we continue to look at innovative ways of progressing our training out to external forces to ensure that it's efficient and effective. We support the NPCC CUF, Criminal Use of Firearms Practitioners Group. That's led by the NPCC CUF lead, Temporary Chief Constable Helen Macmillan, and provides significant support to that, which again is overseeing the national work in relation to tackling the criminal use of firearms. We're also represented at the NCA's Firearms Strategic Governance Group, the NCA Prevent Board, Home Office Illicit Commodities Board, and the Firearms Explosives Licensing Working Group, and a number of European and international forums. We continue to support work funded through the Conflict Stability and Security Fund in the Western Balkan regions, supporting them to combat the threat from international trafficking of firearms. Moving on to the strategic direction of Nabis, the future direction was summarised with the Nabis strategy that was launched in September 2020. Part of that will be supported by a refreshed MOU that is due to go to our governance board in May of this year. And then what we will do following on from that is review our Section 22A collaboration agreement. We've continued to look at continuous improvement methodology, and the work that we're doing at the moment within the forensic labs is identifying those opportunities for efficiencies, which will allow us to spend more time on more time-consuming examinations that will allow development of intelligence links that will provide significant upstream prevent and pursue activity. We're working with the National Transforming Forensics Programme, looking at options around future potential delivery of forensic services around ballistics, and trying to identify opportunities to reach the aspiration of forces that actually all forensic examination of firearms and ballistic material is completed within a 2 to 4 week period of time. In terms of operating costs, the funding details are contained within the paper. The majority of the expenditure is on staffing costs, 69% is spent on staffing costs. We have capital reserves that account for 9%, which was previously agreed by Chief Constable's Council to enable us to be self-sufficient with our capital replacement programme, the most expensive item of which is our integrated ballistic identification system equipment. We're on track to meet our budget obligations for this financial year, and similarly we're in the process of revisiting Chiefs Council in February with our next 3-year funding paper and proposals to a revised funding formula. And finally, impact of Brexit. We haven't been able to, as a result of Brexit, continue to lead on a number of European work streams. However, we are still active participants within those work streams, and our work within the Western Balkans hasn't been affected. We continue to share ballistic data across the EU and wider internationally, and have excellent relationships with Europol, Interpol, and bilateral countries also take place. I appreciate that was a very quick overview of the paper, but really happy to answer any questions that you may have, Commissioner, or the board may have.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent. Are there any comments, questions or matters arising from the report, please? I don't see anybody indicating. I think Jonathan Jardine has a question. Jonathan.
Thanks very much, Commissioner. Just a couple of questions, if I might, Joe, issues that I think are potentially of interest. The Nabis relies on very highly trained specialist staff, and one imagines that the market for such people is somewhat limited in a way. There aren't many opportunities. What are the issues around ensuring a steady supply of trained firearms forensic staff for Nabis? And secondly, and potentially related to that, we often hear about the instability and the issues in the private forensics market, which does have a role in relation to firearms forensics. Is that what impact is that having both on Nabis and on the ability of forces to obtain firearms forensics information and firearms intelligence information?
Thank you, Jonathan. So in relation to the first one around staff and staff training, we have within our forensic hubs technicians and experts. Previously, we struggled to recruit directly experts because of the level of training required, and it's quite a niche area of forensics. So what we have done over recent years is recruit in technicians and effectively train them up to the level that they are able to move into expert vacancies if those vacancies are there. In terms of trying to ensure that we have suitable people coming through, we engage significantly with key universities. In fact, some of my staff have been this week engaging with Cranfield, where there are some forensic ballistic courses that are ongoing there to encourage those applicants when they come through. We've recently gone through a recruitment process, and we will be welcoming at the Northern Hub 2 technicians that are due to start over the next month, and 1 to our Central Hub. So it's a continuing challenge because of those issues around. It's a very niche area of the market. However, we do continue to have significant interest when we put out to advertise for those staff. On the second point, in relation to the external sort of forensic service providers, the forensic service providers, in essence, will be the majority of the work that they undertake is the classification of firearms. That isn't something that's currently within the MOU for Nabis to do. It's something that we can do, however, would require additional resource if we were to take that on wholesale for England and Wales forces. The other areas that in particular the forensic service providers provide is scene attendance around assessment of scenes and trajectory of firearms and those sorts of things, some of the more niche areas of business. What the Transforming Forensics piece of work is looking to do is identify potential options for future delivery of all of those services to maintain resilience across the whole of the forensics platform, and the piece that I'm leading on is around firearms in particular. The options that have been identified are going for options evaluation next month, with a view to then looking at feasibility around whether or not any of those are ways forward that are deemed feasible for UK policing. Certainly a number of forces have within their capabilities the ability to do firearms classification. And again, that's been taken into account in terms of what's the best way forward, because for some forces that isn't a financially viable option to pursue.
Thank you very much, Chief Superintendent. We have a question from board member Charmaine Burton. Charmaine. We don't seem to be able to hear you, unfortunately.
If you adjust the settings on your laptop to make sure that it's the microphone for the laptop that's is where your sound is coming from.
Well, we'll see if Charmaine can manage to resolve that. In the meantime, I have a couple of questions. Chief Superintendent, obviously, as you've indicated in your paper, we act as hosts, as do, of course, Greater Manchester Police for Nabis. Does that carry any overhead costs that do not end up being covered by payments made by other forces?
So the collaboration agreement identifies those services that we go into. So, for example, the HR support and finance support. But most of the operating that we do, we are fairly self-sufficient. We pay for our estates in terms of lease agreements that we have with both GMP and WMP. We haven't got into the process of identifying sort of the requirements that we have on the likes of IT and HR, but it is fairly limited within both West Midlands and Greater Manchester Police. And I think that the benefits that both forces get with the proximity of the hubs, the fact that we're co-located with WMP forensic staff and also GMP forensic staff, I think very much outweigh any slight additional costs from providing those additional support services.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent. I think we're still attempting to resolve Charmaine's difficulty, so I'll just ask a second question, if I might. You mentioned at paragraph 11 of your report that self-loading pistols and shotguns continue to be the most common firearm types used. However, you also drew attention to converted firearms that continue to be a major threat in terms of availability and use in the UK, with top venting blank firing pistols being legally imported into the UK and then converted to fire live rounds. Are you aware of any action or campaign at the moment, either by government or elsewhere, to consider regulating the importation of these blank firing pistols, firstly, and secondly, what action is it possible to take to regulate the extent to which those blank firing pistols can then be converted to fire live rounds?
Really good questions, Commissioner, and certainly those are the discussions that we have with the National Crime Agency and the Home Office Firearms Policy Group. So in terms of that, there will always be the requirement to have blank firing pistols for the likes of starter pistols, that type of thing, that there are legitimate uses for them. Forward venting blank firing pistols are not able to be legally imported into the UK without specific licensing around those for that very reason. The top venting are ones that we have only seen of late. However, we've been working closely with the National Crime Agency in terms of taking enforcement action where those have been identified as potentially being converted. And there's been a lot of work that's been done nationally around that. Similarly, we've been linking with the Home Office and the NCA around linking in overseas with those countries where those are being manufactured, and similarly looking at the legislation within those countries. And the NCA and the Home Office and ourselves have had a number of visits overseas to try and address some of those issues upstream. There is also within the legal framework the ability, if it can be proved that those particular items are readily convertible, then actually they become unlawful. So again, there's work ongoing to look at which of those blank firing pistols are readily convertible, and that's the key point really, is not all of them are readily convertible and don't pose that threat. However, those that are the ones that we're focusing on. Hopefully I've covered your questions then.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent. Much appreciated. I think Charmaine is indeed ready to ask her question now. Charmaine.
Yep. So my question's on Brexit, and has Brexit affected financially West Midlands Police funds in this area, and if so, how?
Certainly from a Nabis perspective, the funding hasn't been affected by Brexit in any way. Our funding goes through to Chief Constable's Council and is agreed at that level, and then there is a funding formula by which each force's specific funding is identified from that. And I'm pleased to say that the forces, we don't have any issue with the forces providing us with that funding that goes out on an annual basis.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent. Do we have any other questions for the Chief Superintendent? In the absence, I will ask just one further question, if I might. Chief Superintendent, what's your assessment of progress towards speedier and more complete submission of ballistic material and firearms intelligence to Nabis by forces in general?
I think there's certainly a real appetite by forces to improve this. We have only recently been able to identify a method whereby we think we can make an assessment around firstly the recovery of items at scenes, because there has to be a balance between the time that you take searching at a scene and the prospect of recovering ballistic material. So we have seen greater emphasis placed by forces on that. There are challenges with the current route that some forces have to take by using external forensic service providers to do preliminary work on items before they come to Nabis. So, for example, if there is a requirement around fingerprinting, DNA or classification, then invariably those will be done by the force with a forensic service provider before they come to Nabis, which can result in significant delays coming through to us. We've, with the change in the tasking that's come through from the NCA, we have seen some greater focus from forces. It's a little bit early to say how significant that progress has been, but one of the challenges that we find is the inability for us to effectively track through an item all the way through the system. So with the spending review bid for a replacement Nabis database, a system that we're calling BEAMS, that would provide the capability, if we get the funding for it, for an officer or staff member on the street on their mobility device to have a Nabis app. At the point they recover an item, they can take a photograph, upload it onto the app. We become aware of it. It gives it a barcode, and we can start to track that through the system. So I think it's that there is certainly the desire of forces to improve things, because I think forces appreciate that with firearms intelligence, it needs to be turned around really quickly, because the pace at which that commodity, that firearm, gets moved around criminal hands. So and we are just supporting in terms of identifying the methods by which forces potentially can enhance what they're doing in this particular area.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent. Forgive me, I just have one further question. That just relates to the timescale that exists in relation to the funding bid that's been submitted to the Home Office around the need to replace the Nabis database. Do we have any idea of what that timescale is at the moment or not?
So I was in communication yesterday with the Home Office. They are hoping that we will know within the next few weeks whether or not that has been successful. The bid is a joint bid with the Ballistic Evidence Analytical Management System, BEAMS, which is the criminal side. The other side of that bid is the National Firearms Licensing Management System, NFLMS, which is used across licensing units across England and Wales. So we are cautiously optimistic, but at the moment we haven't had confirmation around funding, but we expect to have that over the next few weeks.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Chief Superintendent, and thank you very much for your report and presentation. It's much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Agenda item 6 is preparing for the Commonwealth Games. This report is one of a number of regular updates to the board to give confidence that the Commonwealth Games security work will be of high quality. This paper also focuses on legacy to ensure that West Midlands Police is in a position to take advantage of the opportunities the Games will bring. Operation Unity is the force's work on this, and it'll be the largest operation in its history. This item is to be presented by the Chief Constable and Programme Manager Nigel Johnston. So over to you, please, Chief Constable.
Yes, so thank you, Commissioner. We're always excited to talk about Commonwealth Games. We've been very fortunate as a force that in 2021 into 2022, we've had the City of Culture in Coventry. I very much saw last year into the beginning of this year as Coventry's year. This year it is definitely Birmingham and the wider West Midlands with the Commonwealth Games. And it's just worth reflecting that that the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham is very likely to be the first multi-sport event after the pandemic with full spectators. That is an extraordinary privilege and position and responsibility for us and the region, and is a very exciting kind of operation. I'm not going to speak too much of the paper, as you probably, as everybody imagine. It is a very large endeavour, policing operation, and is an increasing part of what the force does. And as you'll see at 6.2, the force is already operational around Commonwealth Games, because of course that phase began with the Queen's Baton Relay, which is travelling around the world. We're not there with it, but actually we do have responsibilities to ensure we're aware of some of the implications and issues that might arise on its leg. As we realistically, the kind of excitement I think begins as the phase 3 here, where the Queen's Baton Relay returns to the region. But as you're aware, we will have officers with the Queen's Baton Relay and be responsible for it throughout its time in the UK. So realistically, as we enter June, Games is very much underway. And of course, on the 28th of July, we begin Games proper with the opening ceremony, having done lots of preparation, and that's detailed out at 6.2. It's just worth reminding the security responsibilities for Games are different than many of the other events we look after. So whilst I have responsibility for the policing operation, I also have delegated responsibility of the government for overall security, which means that I oversee the work of the organising committee and the broader response to security, as well as simply the execution of police operations. And there are aspects here that are cover that off. In terms of the operation, I think the paper sets it out well, and we'll answer any questions around that particularly. What I would say is that the first thing to say is we are working incredibly hard to ensure the delivery of this endeavour augments and supports the policing of the West Midlands rather than is a detriment to it. We're supported to that end by the fact this is funded and separately funded. There is a budget of over £100 million diverted to security, and that will support lots of the work we do. But of course, we are working through the detailed impact because, of course, we will have a leave cancellation during this period. And what we don't want to do is build up too much leave and too many rest days that might impact on our service through the rest of the year, which we'll work through. So very exciting, lots of detail in the paper around that. In terms of legacy, we've been always focused on the legacy work. There is a huge amount of work that is taking place at the moment. This organising committee in Birmingham has dedicated resources to legacy, which is unusual for many of the events we see. That's simply an issue the host city does. We can see lots of programmes running about skilling people into work. There is a fantastic youth programme that's running, and we are making sure, as I know you are as the Commissioner's Office, that we exploit the potential of using these games-wide programmes to support many of the challenges that we face. Likewise, as games comes to an end, we'll be very attentive to the employment opportunities through many of the skilled people that work on Commonwealth Games as well. But we are actually looking to use volunteers through the process. We are looking to increase the opportunity around engagement. And of course, as we've talked about with C3 today, we have been upgrading the force's capabilities to meet the security requirements of games. Commissioner, I'll probably stop there. It's a very extensive paper. I'm sure there are plenty of questions to answer, and myself and Nigel will happily answer them all.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable, for that presentation. Do we have any comments, questions or matters arising from the report? Yes, we have Board Member Councillor Bhupinder Garkul first, and then Board Member Charmaine Burton after that. Bhupinder.
Thank you, Commissioner. It's not really a question, it's something that I should have mentioned. It's just occurred to me now. I actually got an email from the committee. I've been nominated to be one of the Queen's Baton relay carriers. So I'm just waiting my, I think they're going to do some background checks and they're going to be back in touch with me. So if I'm successful, I look forward to being one of the Queen Baton relay people. So I just wanted to mention that. I'm sorry.
Well, no, that's fantastic. That's fantastic news, Bhupinder. Congratulations, and I hope you've gone rapidly into training. Sorry, Chief Constable.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've recently just publicised, I think, some of these opportunities in the force, and the organising committee are looking for 2,022 people to carry the baton while it moves around the United Kingdom. So we would really encourage people to nominate really good citizens in the West Midlands because we want to see some of those. You're probably aware that these roles are different than the escort team, so we will have police officers from the 4 forces in the West Midlands region forming an escort team to look after the baton as it goes on its journey around the country. But as well as baton relay requests, the organising committee are looking for people to take part in the opening ceremony. I'm told if you're a participant, you have to be able to dance to a beat, so that would exclude me. But certainly there is a lot of interest, I think, around things. So if people were to go on the Commonwealth Games Organising Committee website, you'll see there's a tremendous amount of opportunities.
Thank you, Chief Constable. Board Member Charmaine Burton, I think you're next.
Yeah. You mentioned that you have got a youth programme. Can you open up a bit more about what will that entail and what it is?
Right, so this isn't a West Midlands Police one. A little bit like we've done through the City of Culture, we're leaning very hard on the opportunities that are available through the organising committee. So we have been doing some specific stuff in schools through our engagement team in the areas where Commonwealth Games is taking place. We've been using games as a vehicle to engage with young people about what's happening, what's coming, as a means of driving up positive interactions with schools. Some of the artwork that's been created, I think, through those programmes is going to be used in the logistics sites where we have officers coming in from across the country, so they have a look and feel for the efforts young people put in that area. So we've been doing that specifically. But there is actually a youth programme running within the Commonwealth Games itself. And we'll try and ensure we get some good exposure to that. Some of that work is going to be publicised in the next few weeks and months. because while there's a lot of long-range planning, I think what you'll see both in terms of tourism and travel opportunities, business opportunities, opportunities for young people, employment skills, those sorts of programs are going to emerge very strongly over the next month or so. Nigel, is there anything you want to add on the stuff that's going on from the organising committee?
Not from the organising committee. I would just say that from our perspective and our engagement with young people, it's tailored for both schools, colleges, higher education. So that programme is tailored to different levels.
Yeah. So we've got a dedicated funded engagement team working around it just to try and use that as positive options. But the bigger programme is an organising committee one.
Okay, I've got a few questions here. My next question is around, could you give us a few examples of how you're engaging communities other than education institutions, faith organisations or community organisations? Because there are many people out there who are not attached to any of these institutes or organisations, or who may not be as engaged due to the pandemic. So are there any other engagement streams?
Yeah, sure. So we've got to be very conscious there's lots of different engagements going on from different agencies around games. So you've got traffic and transportation that's been run by West Midlands Combined Authority. You've got the individual local authorities, particularly Birmingham and Sandwell, but many of the others. You've also got organising committee engagements. So what the police engagement is simply, trying to ensure that the areas that are directly impacted and affected by games are well aware of the issues and impact around the policing issues. So the types of work we're doing, people are aware the areas around Perry Bar are quite heavily affected. What we are doing is trying to use every opportunity in conjunction with those agencies to ensure people are aware of the impact of games. So our job in some ways, we are using it as an opportunity for people to get excited, but the engagement we're doing is to make sure people are aware of the impact of games during key phases. Is there anything you want to add to that, Nigel, just around the engagement we're doing particularly?
Not only that we have a dedicated engagement programme and work stream within the programme itself that's taking us forward. So, as you say, it is around kind of working with those impacted communities around the venue to understand what their needs are.
So we could share more detail with you on that, but the engagement is very much on the policing footprint, we'll see, and as you can imagine, that's going to be heavier in some of the areas directly around the venues, particularly around Perry Bar area, bits of Sandwell. So we're engaging with those groups, being aware of what's coming, but there's a lot of different engagements going on around games, and certainly our job's not to do the job of the organising committee on this. So we can share the stuff we're doing, but it's very focused on the policing bit.
Yeah, that's really more what I was focused on. But anyway, 9.2, it talks about examples of safety and security legacy and key benefits and opportunities. Can you give a few examples of what that could be or look like?
Yeah, so I think there's a number of issues. So we are very keen to grow volunteering opportunities within the work we're doing. So obviously there is an extraordinarily large programme being run for volunteers for the games itself. We suspect that we will use some of those people within the security environment as volunteers, as well as private contracted securities in our broader family. We are very keen, I think, to support the work that's going on by the organising committee. So, for example, we will need a significant amount of people licensed and accredited for security work and catering in the region. We want to support the organising committee attracting those people, because the organising committee will be skilling them during this period. So we want to make sure people come away with some skills and abilities, so we'll help with that. In terms of the community engagement work we're doing, we talked about the stuff around particularly the venues. We will use that very much to try and ensure that people in that area are in engagement with policing. And also, we've tried to kind of also build this one police family through the game security. So if you imagine security is going to have really four components: the police, which will be West Midlands Police and officers on mutual aid. It will have the role of the military in some niche and general capacities. it will have private sector security, and it will have volunteers in that space. And our intention is to build a one family, one team ethos, which we've noticed at other of these events is often lacking. People can feel like they're delivering their kind of silos. We see that as a real opportunity to attract more people to want to engage and work in policing who may not be attracted to date. And then obviously the other issue is the police skills. So we have been doing a lot of work to upskill for the events. The paper mentions we used police staff on mutual aid to COP26 because policing is more than just the police officers. Inevitably, there are lots of key and important roles. So we're building the skills up for lots of our police staff to ensure they play an important role in supporting the games work as well. So they're kind of some of the things that we're doing. I don't know, Nigel, is there anything you can add on volunteering particularly over and above what's in the paper?
Not what's in the paper, but as you say, increasing that the skills and capabilities within the organisation, additional search capability, security coordinators within the planning team got back into the organisation as well.
Yeah, they're the main areas really.
Okay, one final question, and it refers to 9.3 in the paper, and it talks about ensuring the well-being and welfare of the communities and volunteers. From a West Midlands police perspective, how do you ensure that, or what work is being considered around that?
Yeah, sure. So if you can imagine, you'll see from the paper, one of the challenges of games is the duration of the operation that takes place. So if you look particularly, I think it's at 6.2, we start quite intensively in July. Quite a lot of what we're doing. We will, well before the opening ceremonies, be at a position where the force is running games operation 24 hours a day. We've then got the 10 days of competition that's taking place, which will be particularly intense. So they are very operationally intense periods where there'll be a lot of activity going on. We will have some sites where we're hosting staff on mutual aid. Many of them will be staying overnight and we'll be accommodating them, so we've got all the welfare issues. We will have lots of police vehicles and parking that might impact on the community. We will have lots of people working within different teams than they've normally done. All of that brings quite a big welfare and logistics operation support to make sure that all runs. And as you can imagine, we don't get a practice at these things. You kind of build it and off you go. So what we've been trying to do around that entire work, which is around our staff, the mutual aid staff, the volunteers will be using, and the impact particularly on communities of this size and footprint, is make sure we plan these things well. We have a dedicated team that look after logistics in this operation. We are testing some of that work ahead of games. We're working very tightly with the unions and the Police Federation so that the right welfare and support's in place. And at the same time, we've been peer reviewing this work. So the obviously COP26 in Police Scotland, but also the G7 that took place in Devon and Cornwall. We've just had some peer review work done by Devon and Cornwall on our logistics planning to make sure all those things are properly in place. So there's a lot of work going around that. It's a particularly dedicated stream of work we do. We need to make sure we've got a sustainable volunteer and police workforce, and the footprint of the policing operations don't, add value to communities and are not disruptive. So we're doing quite a lot of planning around that area.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charmaine, for those questions, and thank you, Chief Constable. I think we have another question from board member Councillor Bhupinder Garkul. Bhupinder.
Thanks, Commissioner. Chief, I just want to ask you, I've got no doubt that the Westminster Police are, working really well and they're doing everything they can. They're engaging with communities. But are there any communities that are not engaging with the police? Have you got anything that you can share with us on that?
No, I think the areas we've engaged are important. I mean, I think the challenge we've got, and I think this is building well, is making sure all communities are kind of bought in, understanding, and are excited about games. And I think you'll see this building dramatically. So, that the first thing I think has taken place is there's been a lot of thoughts given to the sports that are being played in Birmingham. so that they are attracting a wide range of interest off the many communities we have here. So, for example, the cricket, women's cricket taking place at Edgbaston, I think is something that will draw a lot of attention from different communities, which is really good. So the organising committee's thought really hard about the sports festivals. If I'm really honest, the community engagement at the organising committee's really impressed me. Commissioner and I were last year, towards the end of the summer, at a community event that took place in Newtown, and there was the Games Engagement Committee trying to activate young people around sport. And many of the people in that community have no understanding of the Commonwealth Games and what was coming to the city. So that constant tell people is important, because we want the local community to be very excited. I don't think it's any secret the ticket sales are really good. They are probably, at the moment, cautiously we'd say, ahead of where you might expect an event of this to be. So we know people across the country are going to be excited. And a lot of people in the West Midlands have availed themselves of the preferential ballot that was here. So we've got good engagement. So I see no problems. I think we've got engagement. We've still got some communities don't understand what this is and it's coming. But I think you'll see a huge effort of the organising committee really starting in the next couple of months, so that nobody who's in the West Midlands can't be unaware something exciting is coming, and the benefits that will be there for them. And particularly, I draw attention to some of the venues that are being built. The aquatic centre at Sandwell is going to have enormous benefits for the communities in Sandwell after the games as well. So we'll certainly be getting people excited, and we will help all we can. But we can't say we've got a lack of engagement. I just think that we just need to build the excitement, I think, as a region.
Thank you.
Thank you. We now have a question from Chief Executive Jonathan Jardine. Jonathan.
Great, thanks, Commissioner, and thanks for the presentations and the report. Just a couple of areas of questions from me. One of the issues that seems to come up with some regularity at events of this sort, that involve large elements of mutual aid, relates to the welfare and accommodation of mutual aid deployed police officers. So what assurances can be given relating to that? That those officers coming from across the country will be sort of well housed and appropriately supported in their time with us. And also, just as a kind of corollary of that, around on a converse side, there is also sometimes issues relating to the good conduct of officers arriving on mutual aid when deployed away from home for extended periods. And again, what's thoughts being given to that issue? And then the second area is understandably the Commonwealth Games will attract a huge number of supporting events and other kind of whether it's sort of festivals or concerts and all sorts of other cultural events as well. What is the sense of our level of understanding, or the force's level of understanding of those other events, and our appropriate mechanisms in place to kind of understand where those events are going to be and what their potential security and policing implications are? Thank you.
Thank you. So in response to the first question, we, as the paper indicates, that we have a requirement for quite an extensive level of mutual aid. So about a third, just upwards of a third of the resourcing that we used on games is just West Midlands Police. Everybody in West Midlands Police will be engaged in the Operation Commonwealth Games because delivering this event and, ensuring we provide the services will be one joint effort, and we'll do things very differently at that time. But we will require mutual aid, and it'll go in particular phases. There will be specialist mutual aid, firearms, search capability, and there'll be some general mutual aid around it. There's a lot of thought gone into this. We've learned a lot from the large operations over the last few years. With a number of global events in the UK, we've been able to learn a lot. And so I think there are a number of things that have been thought through. The first is we thought very hard at the venues that mutual aid officers will go to and where they'll be deployed. So there will be some venues that are largely resourced off mutual aid because of their geography, their proximity to accommodation, the ability to just have that portable workforce on site. The command will still be from West Midlands Police or one of the regional forces that we've got, because they're integrated into our planning, but we've thought very carefully about where the officers will go to so that we minimise the level of travelling around the conurbation for people who are up with us for a period. The second issue, we've tried to look at blocks of time. So what we don't want particularly to do is have lots of people travelling to and from. So we are working through arrangements on that. We certainly hope that some of the staff who come here will have some days off while they're here with us, and they hope they'll enjoy their time in the West Midlands. And we're putting a lot of effort into thinking where, if people are on days off while they're on mutual aid, what activities and arrangements will be available for them to soak up the best of what will be a very exciting time in this part of the country. We've worked incredibly hard on the accommodation provision that will be for mutual aid officers to make sure it's of a very high standard, and that we've worked very closely with our local federation and our unions to make sure there's a good understanding. And when officers come on mutual aid, one of the things we have developed is what we call the MALO role. They're mutual aid liaison officers. So a number of people will come with the mutual aid resources to ensure they manage the welfare of their people from their force. And we found this to be a pivotally successful feature of mutual aid, so that there is in effect a senior leader embedded in that mutual aid deployment to make sure the force that comes is coming and is able to kind of perform and work, and that we're not in effect having to juggle lots of welfare issues that come from other forces that we don't know how to key into their systems. We've got a turnkey operation through the MALOs. And that's all coordinated by MPOC and the work we're doing. So I think we should be very comfortable that we've got the right approach. We are testing that very extensively, and that side of the operation has been subject to quite a lot, some of the peer review work, because there's been some rich learning, I think, from COP26 and from the G7. And we as well as sending observers to those events, which we did, and we actively participated on the police staff mutual aid in logistics at COP26. We sent staff for specifically to carry out those roles. We've got our own lived experience now of having to do this in other forces that we can bring back to the West Midlands. In terms of the other events that will take place, during the period, so we are aware, I think, of the large-scale events that are being organised by the organising committee. We also have, just into the run of this, the Jubilee Celebrations that are in early June, which are going to develop, I think, across the region. And we have to bear in mind that we've got normal West Midlands policing business taking place, and we've also got an early start to a football season, which will start early because of the World Cup issues. We're trying to make sure we manage those, and particularly the work we're doing with the football authorities around minimising home fixtures, if we can do, in that early part of the season, to make sure we just have... There's only so much sport we can take in one go, and we're just going to try and make sure we've able to manage that as carefully as we can do. However, it is fair to say that what tends to happen is that as we get close to the event, a variety of people, probably about a month and a half out, will go, oh, the Commonwealth Games here, wouldn't it be a good idea to do something? And so this 1,000 flowers bloom moment often takes hold. And it is my strongest recollection from leading part of the work around the Manchester Commonwealth Games 20 years ago, that the amount of let's have one of these moments started to spring up at great pace. We have built our ability to absorb those in the operation. We have a good understanding of the planned ones that will take place in individual local authority areas. I do suspect we'll have to be responsive, because there will be more of them emerge, I think, as the excitement builds. But I think that we've got a fairly good understanding, and some of the zoning and planning work we've done with the local authorities has a good understanding of live sites, some of which will be incredibly exciting and very different at this event, but a lot of that is well planned in as part of the policing operation already.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. I don't see anybody else indicating with any further questions. However, I have a couple of questions, please. Clearly, the people of the West Midlands are looking forward to and are excited by the prospect of the Commonwealth Games this summer. However, they are also understandably going to be concerned about the wider policing service within the West Midlands. How is West Midlands Police ensuring that there won't be an adverse impact to policing in the lead up to, during and after the games, either in terms of, for example, access to policing response, investigations, concerns over backlogs of cases building up, and challenges that we're aware of that arise in relation to leave, Chief Constable?
Yeah, Commissioner, I mean, I think this is a hugely important issue. As you well know, that a normal summer is quite a busy time in West Midlands Police. For a long period of time, we've had to treat it as almost a kind of major operation in its own right, because inevitably there are lots of pressures. So the first thing to say is the judgment that I and the Gold Commander have made about the number of officers deployed to the Commonwealth Games reflects the kind of balance around the number of officers we can dedicate into the operation and the balance of mutual aid. I obviously want West Midlands Police officers and staff to play an important part of it. I think it is really helpful that people from the region are welcoming visitors here, and we will make sure we've got a big part to play. But there is a limit as to how much of that we can do in business as usual. So hence the balance of mutual aid that's used, general mutual aid rather than just specialist. The second issue is we intend through the work we do to try and minimise, we're reducing the amount of abstraction during this period. So we are putting a pause on some things like our recruiting at a particular phases during this. So we don't have lots of new people in training. We're trying to get some of that done a little earlier, but some of it will fall after games, so that we have minimised the amount of abstractions we have. We've also put a leave embargo on during this period, so there is a restriction on annual leave that can be taken. We are going to have to have some people on leave. I think that at some stage we'll work that through, because if we don't have some leave during that period, it will get difficult. But I think it will be very restricted. And we'll have to manage that carefully on the run into the summer and beyond. And we're certainly going to want, I suspect, to see some flexibility, I think, from, shall we say, some of our local head teachers and schools, because it will be a difficult time for officers and staff to take leave. So we will bolster our numbers by some of those restrictions. We are hoping, and we are working this through the Home Office, that many of the rest days that we're going to cancel, that we don't have to reinstate them and are able to pay them. We think that makes good sense for the public, because if we have to reinstitute that day, then those are rest days that we need to take throughout the year. We are already quite pressured on this, because we've had to cancel rest days quite a lot over the last year because of the extraordinary demands of the pandemic and the other activities we've had. And it isn't good, I think, that we cancel too many rest days. We need people to take time off and have time with their families. But it would be helpful, I think, with these to ensure that they are properly paid for, so we don't incur that at a later stage. So those are the measures we've got in place, I think, to minimise the impact around it. What I am hoping, and I think there's some good faith for this belief, is that the volume of extra resourcing that we'll be putting into the region, and let's be honest, some of the parts of the force that we will be policing through this part of games are some of the areas that can be quite busy, so areas like the city centre of Birmingham, that this extra resource will have, I think, a positive impact on crime during this period of time. That, you know, as you probably say, there'll be some days where we've got almost 3,000 people deployed on games. That level of policing, you know, in my experience of these events, can have a suppressive effect on crime and demand. So hopefully this will add value as well. But the resourcing piece is quite a juggle, and I would just re-emphasise the advantage we've got is we are being funded to deliver this operation. So it is absolutely being well supported by government to try and minimise the level of demand on policing. There's just a few technical things we've now got to work through.
Thank you, Chief Constable. And finally, from me, we know, for example, as was illustrated during the course of the Olympic Games in 2012, that one area of risk is around private contractor security. And one might be concerned that, particularly with COVID and Brexit, that level of risk might still be further enhanced. What steps is West Midlands Police taking to manage that risk, and what mitigations are in place and contingencies to address any issues that might arise out of any failure on the part of private contractor security?
Yes, so I think this is absolutely always the question on these events. The labour requirements to service a multi-sport event like the Games are gigantic. You know, it's not just security, it's catering, it's transport. There's a huge amount of people that will be needed to put this show on. And absolutely, as you rightly say, Commissioner, that there are you know, a number of areas where there are existing labour shortages on transport, on catering and on security already in the labour market. So I think a number of issues really. The contracting approach, I think, has been very focused on this. I think the organising committee in its procurement has worked to spread the risks, but at the same time engage in a very candid way with the organisers to make sure that with the suppliers to make sure this is worked through. There is also some of the pre-employment work that's going on in the region will be the opportunity to try and increase the amount of qualified people for some of these roles. So I think there is some work to help the labour market taking place. In addition, you know, it's not just getting people to turn up on the day, but it's keeping them through the games as well. If you are not well cared for and treated as an employee in one of these events where, frankly, it's a temporary contract, then you're less likely to stay. And we have seen at some of these large events a degradation in staffing during the event, which is why this one Games family principle is very important. We want the people working on security to feel an intrinsic part of the family that we've got, that they feel part and close to the police, they feel cared for by us, not just the contractor, and they are valued every bit as much as a volunteer is on this Games and seen as a real contributor to it. I think that has on occasions been omitted through these events, and it is the commitment of ourselves and the organising committee to make this exciting so you can get skills, you can be part of something, you can feel just as much as part of the security operation as any police officer working on this event will do. So we'll do that as well. The final issues you've probably seen, we are working through with the government that we have seen innovative use of military personnel to support areas like this in the past. It was a strong feature of the Games in Glasgow. It was a very nice and exciting feature. You know, actually, again, you know, the West Midlands is an area, I'm sure, where our armed forces want to recruit more young people. Young people being able to see, engage and understand the military, I think, is important. So it's not something to be threatened about. We are working through with military colleagues around contingencies as well as clearly the work policing would do. So there is a lot of focus on this. One can't say there aren't risks around this because they emerge at many of these events. It is a real challenge for the market to mobilise that amount of labour. But actually, I think this is, certainly if anybody's out there thinking about this, this is a good opportunity, and we want to make it a really enjoyable experience for people doing what is a vital job to make sure this event takes place. And I think we're doing as much as we can to de-risk that.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Chief Constable, and thank you very much as well, Nigel Johnston, for attending and assisting with that presentation. Thank you. I'd just say in conclusion around this agenda item, we have 1,500 West Midlands police officers, 270 police staff and about a further 2,000 officers from around the country who will be working with the military and private security contractors on Operation Unity, the Commonwealth Games security operation. It'll be the biggest and most important undertaken in the force's nearly 50 years history. We have thousands of athletes and hundreds of thousands of people who will be visiting the region over the course of the Games, and of course their safety and security is paramount. To ensure that the Games have a minimal impact on other policing activities, the force have enacted a leave embargo and financial agreements are being sought with the Home Office to ensure that wider West Midlands police activity in 2022 is not put at risk. I trust that the Home Office will step up, play its part and do what it takes to provide the appropriate and necessary financial support. To do otherwise at this stage of the planning process would be a serious dereliction of duty. Agenda item 7 is the West Midlands Police budget. This report to board provides an early analysis of the police funding settlement for 2022-23. This includes the level of grant and council tax precept income for 22-23. And the report also provides the headlines in terms of the level of police funding for next year and an analysis and comparison with other police and crime commissioner council tax rates. This item is to be presented by the Chief Finance Officer of the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, Mark Kenyon. Can you please kindly present your report, Mark? Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, so just in way of introduction, this report details a provisional financial settlement for West Midlands PCC for next financial year. This was announced by government just before Christmas on the 16th of December. As you say, along with the analysis of the financial settlement, we have the initial budget proposals for 22-23. The content of this report on a further report detailing the actual budget for next year, along with assumptions around income, will be presented to the Police and Crime Panel on the 31st of January, which is next Monday. So the Commissioner started a budget consultation on the 17th of December on the proposals that are detailed in the report, and this consultation runs to the 30th of January. So in terms of the total grant settlement for next year, it is forecast West Midlands Police will receive 559 million, which is an increase of 30 million based on the previous year's financial settlement. This additional grant is to enable the force to recruit an additional 488 police officers during next financial year as part of the National Uplift Programme to reach the target of just over 1,200 officers by March 2023. We were also given headline numbers in terms of grant settlements for the following 2 financial years. These are expected to show a growth of around 100 million in 22-23 for police grant, and by another 150 million in 24-25 for police grant. We expect the West Midlands to receive around 6% of those amounts, or roughly around £6 million in 23-24 and £9 million in 24-25. So the other main points from the settlement are the ability for all PCCs across England and Wales to increase their council tax precept for abandoned property by £10 in 22-23, and this opportunity will remain over the next 2 financial years, covered by the comprehensive spending review. It also announced that the pay freeze on police officers and staff will be lifted as part of the 22-22 pay award, with PCCs expected to pay for this pay award from the funding settlement. As we know, a lot of the police budget is spent on police officer pay and police staff, so that the pay award will be a significant cost to the police budget. In addition, there'll be also pressures around increased national insurance contributions for employers around the social care levy, and also there's other significant cost pressures that we're aware of in the economy that we're all aware of in terms of cost of gas and electricity and fuel and other costs. We expect the inflationary pressures that I've just gone through to potentially cost around £25 million from next April for the force, which is obviously a significant pressure. As part of the settlement, the government announced that they expect forces to continue their efficiency drives, something that within the West Midlands we've delivered over a number of years through the change programme and other efficiency and productivity initiatives. Government specifically expects forces to achieve around £100 million of cash flow efficiency savings by 24-25. So in terms of the settlement itself, the report details some specific points that the £10 increase, given the financial position of West Midlands Police, is not discretionary for areas such as the West Midlands that are reliant very much on central government grant funding. Also, that the £10 assumption is really a mandation by government to actually increase precepts by £10, because all government's assumptions around police funding assume a £10 increase over the year. And as I've detailed already, because we're faced with significant financial pressures, the £10, which we estimate will raise around £9 million, is not sufficient to cover the increased inflationary pressures that the force will face. So in terms of the Commissioner's budget proposals, that are included in the report, the assumption around uplift and delivering the uplift programme across the force by March 2023 is crucial. The ability to have a workforce that is more representative, should I say, of the public continues as part of the police uplift programme. A Precepts increase of £10 in line with the government's assumptions, and another few areas of detail, those around maintaining the community safety funding and external commissioning grants funding that are detailed at 21-22 levels for the next financial year. Because of the way the money works in terms of the level of funding we're going to receive and the actual increased costs that are going to happen next year, we forecast to happen next year, there's a requirement for the PCC to save around £11 million to actually balance the budget. These will be discussed at Police and Crime panel next week. But these have increased on our initial assumptions, mainly because of the gas and electricity market and also further pressures around mobility and the forces learning strategy. So the report mentions the financial pressures that I've also already referred to, as in the 2.5% pay award forecast for police staff and police officers from Sector M to 22. Obviously, if this is actually higher than that, depending on the outcome of independent pay review bodies, that will be a further pressure on budgets. So, with a £10 increase, the precept for the West Midlands on Band D will be £187.55. As we know, the precept level for West Midlands is the second lowest in the country. The report details in paragraph 12 particular bands and how they will be impacted by that increase across bands A, B, C, D, and so forth. And also the report details a comparison of the precepts in the West Midlands with other forces, in particular in the appendix. You can see that the highest precept, if a £10 increase actually takes place across the board, Surrey will be the highest, around £295. And locally, our precept is significantly less than the neighbouring PCCs. So just finally, the report makes reference to the capital programme over the next 3 financial years, details the major areas of investment that will take place. This includes things such as vehicles, IT and D across the force, also the continuation of the estates programme. The report also details indicatively how that capital programme will be funded. That completes my introduction to the report. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Mark, for that. Are there any comments, questions or matters arising from the report, please? Yes, we have a question from board member Councillor Bhupinder Garkul. Bhupinder.
Thanks, Commissioner. Mark, great report again, very detailed. You have covered it, but I just want to be the pessimistic person I am. Obviously, dark days ahead, possibly in regards to fuel with what's going on. Some people, energy experts, are saying that even though we forecast X amount, that the gas prices are going to increase significantly to X amount. Have we got that in place that if we get an eye-watering increase in gas prices, that we can sustain that?
Thank you for the question. Something that we do, as you can imagine, for an organisation like West Midlands Police, we buy through a framework contract with other forces. And it's something that we've done is obviously monitor the market very closely in terms of the increases that are likely to happen. So obviously, it is a significant cost pressure, but it's something that we monitor, and obviously we'll have to sort of obviously pay the bills and obviously look at how we can actually afford those costs. Something that we're obviously looking at as well is things around energy reduction in terms of the green agenda. So although it's a significant pressure, I think it is manageable, and it's one of those things that we have to pay for, but we're doing all we can in terms of cost reduction and sort of managing that risk.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bhupinder. We have another question from board member Charmaine Burton. Charmaine.
Hi, Mark. This is around point 5, and you talk about the additional 42 million. However, it's not clear on what the West Midlands will have from that settlement. What information do you know so far, and is there a time frame in which that information will become clear on how much West Midlands Police will gain?
Yeah, thank you for the question. There's some quite big areas that weren't announced through the financial settlement, and you picked on an area there which is obviously very important to the West Midlands. We were promised as part of the settlement that we would find out by the end of January these additional funding streams around crime reduction and drugs misuse. So we're waiting for those announcements to be made hopefully over the next week, because those fund significant initiatives in the West Midlands. You're aware of the Violence Reduction Unit and also other initiatives as well. So we're hoping that they're going to arrive soon.
What impact, if it doesn't come sooner rather than later, will it have on the some of the areas that you mentioned, like the VRU and others that are already delivering service and are waiting to find out if their funding will be renewed?
Okay, so it's quite a good question, because it is tricky from a financial management point of view, and because, as you know, we've got lots of programs in place that run from year to year, and we do all we can to try and sort of provide confidence to the providers that we give money to, that we are going to receive some long-term funding and those initiatives will take place. And so what we do is basically work with the Home Office or other funding providers to try and get assurance that money will continue, albeit that we haven't actually had a formal announcement. We also look at how we can guarantee potentially some of the PCC's money from other funding sources can actually guarantee carrying on those actual activities for a short period of time into the new financial year if we don't actually receive the money. So it's a case of we cover it on a number of fronts, but it would be helpful if we had multi-year settlements for things of this nature, like we have now with the police grant and the Precepts, because that will help us to plan for better over the longer term, and also give confidence to providers that we can sort of carry on funding things in a long-term or medium to long-term basis if the needs assessment that we've done on particular services or particular types of activities is there.
Have some of those issues been highlighted to government, and if so, has there been a response as yet?
Yeah, it's something that we've continued to lobby government over a number of years, because some of these activities some of these funding streams have been in place for a number of years, and we've also, we've had assurances verbally, like I said, around certain areas, but unfortunately, until you receive a grant funding letter to say this is the money you're going to get, you don't know for sure that you're going to get it. So we have lobbied government. And we're hoping, as I say, that we will get multi-year settlements for these areas that will provide some surety over the medium to long term.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charmaine. We now have a question from Chief Executive Jonathan Jardine. Jonathan.
It's not a question, Commissioner. It's really just following up really on what Mark was just saying and the issues that arise from the way the funding is delivered. I mean, as Mark has said, because of the scale of the OPCC and the financial resources it can call upon, we are in a position in which we can work with our providers to, in the short term at least, kind of manage business continuity. We have the resources to in the short term to make sure that even if that funding announcement doesn't come very soon, we can put a guarantee in place so that those services don't start to unwind towards the end of the financial year with people leaving and notices being issued. I think what causes the problem, what causes a much bigger problem really, is where Home Office or other funding bodies are funding direct to smaller organisations, charities, and other organisations that don't have that ability to manage their cash flow in that way, simply don't have the money in their own reserves to keep the services going during that transition period from one financial year to the next, and they are much more likely therefore to be issuing 30-day notices or 90-day notices to people, and seeing people leave their organisations as a result, and the services stop taking referrals. So that's really where this hits most hard, I think. And then just on what do we not know about what the 42 million or other amounts will be used for, it is that a number of that elements of that will be via competitive schemes. So you'll be expected to bid in, often on quite a short timeline, and we're in the rather, well, uncomfortable position, I think, in some senses almost absurd position of, because there is an insistence on competitive bidding, for example, in safer streets, that the minister's publicly advising us to have schemes ready to go that we can bid in at the point at which the announcement is made. So rather than being able to kind of plan properly, we are having to adapt guesses at what we think those competitive schemes will look like, and put bids in at short notice, which intuitively is not going to be the most efficient way to either allocate the funding, because what you've got there is how much capacity is there locally to pull together a bid, and then you're going to get allocations that aren't really necessarily based on need, but are more about who can put their bid in that's most closest to the conditions that have been set by the funding body. Neither of which feels like a sort of optimal way of running these sorts of what are ostensibly long-term interventions.
Thank you, Jonathan. Was there anything you wanted to come back on in relation to that, Mark?
No, I agree with it all. It's not just a financial issue from managing the forces and your overall budget. It's around the impact on local providers and the ability to continue to deliver services, and for them to be in a position as well that provides them security to provide continuity, which we need.
Yeah, I don't see anybody else indicating, so I've got a couple of questions, please. Is there any information that you can share with the board on how total funding to Westminster Police compares with, say, other forces of a similar size? And along with the low council tax preset levels, what other factors affect the level of funding that West Midlands Police receives?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So if you look at the most similar forces in comparison to West Midlands, those being the Merseyside, West Yorkshire, Greater Manchester and the Metropolitan Police, apart from West Yorkshire, the West Midlands Police is funded the lowest per head of population. So that gives you an idea that we don't fare well when we compare to other organisations of a similar nature. And it's something that we've talked about before, but in terms of Greater Manchester Police, it is a good comparison in terms of the amount of money they get, because of the similarities in terms of size. If they increase their precept by £10 next year, they will probably have around £17 million more a year through the funding mechanism at the moment. And obviously there's lots of reasons for that, but I think that just shows you the inconsistencies in terms of funding. So per head we're quite low compared to most similar forces, and likewise if we do a direct comparison we lose as well. So in terms of your second part of your question about other things that impact on our funding, one of the big things that generates the level of council tax we get is the council tax base, which is basically the values of property across the West Midlands. And although the government uses Band D as a form of saying that the average precept is Band D, if we looked at the average banding across the West Midlands, it'd be a lot lower than that. It'd probably be around Band B or even lower. That means we've got a low council tax base in terms of strength. So we've got a low council tax rate, and we've also got a low council tax base. So that means our ability to raise precepts is sort of disadvantaged in two ways. So those are the sort of key things. Obviously, people's ability to pay council tax as well. And we're seeing through the information we've had so far from local authorities that a number of local authorities have got deficits on their collection funds for council tax, which means that we'll have to have a proportion of those deficits to actually balance the books across the West Midlands in terms of council tax. So that's another factor as well, people's ability to pay council tax impacts on our funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And finally, from me, just in the interests of transparency and clarity, can you explain the process that will now take place in connection with the setting of the budget and precept for 2022-2023 in the next few weeks?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned in my introduction, the Police and Crime Panel will consider your proposal for the budget and the precept next Monday, on the 31st of January. Providing they support that level of council tax in the budget, that will allow you to set the budget by the 1st of March, which is a statutory requirement. Obviously, we've got quite a bit of time between the 31st of January and the 1st of March, so we'd hopefully that you would set the budget before then. Then we will let local authorities know what your precept is going to be to enable them to issue council tax bills with that amount on. If the panel does not support your proposals, we have an opportunity then to go back to panel during the month, during the middle of February, to actually take a revised proposal, and then follow the timeline I've also mentioned around the 1st of March being required to set the budget.
Thank you very much for that, Mark. And thank you for your report and presentation. Just say in conclusion on this agenda item, I was elected on a mandate to rebuild community policing, and that's the job I'm getting on with. People told me that they wanted preventative, proactive, problem-solving and visible police officers out on the streets, keeping people, their families and communities safe and secure. The government's assumed an increase in the policing precept and stated that they expect police forces to increase their policing precept by £10 for a bandee property. I would much rather that the government had fully funded this increase rather than effectively mandating it and transferring the burden onto local council taxpayers. Despite this government mandated rise, Westminster Police will still have the second lowest council tax precept in the country, and it'll be over £60 lower than neighbouring forces such as Warwickshire, West Mercia and Staffordshire. And with rising costs and inflation, West Midlands Police's budget remains under pressure, and a further £11.3 million of savings will still be required to balance the budget. I'd encourage everybody in the West Midlands, if you work, live or study in the region, to respond to the consultation. The consultation will remain open until the 30th of January. So please make sure you have your say. Agenda item 8 is the strategic policing requirement. And this item is to be presented by Assistant Chief Constable Mike O'Hara. We're asking, I just mentioned Assistant Chief Constable, for the benefit of yourself who wasn't in the meeting earlier, we're asking that presentations please kept to about 5 minutes, on the assumption that board members have all had the opportunity to read the paper. It's available to members of the public to read, and so as to maximise the opportunity for questions and discussion of the issues arising from the report. So could you please kindly present your report, Assistant Chief Constable?
Good morning, Commissioners. Confirm you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
Great stuff. So as per your introduction, sir, I will take the report as read. You'll be aware that this is an annual requirement on us as a force to report on the strategic policing requirement, particularly around capacity, capability, consistency and connectivity. And there are 5 key strategic areas of policing business that have been documented in the report: serious and organised crime, counter-terrorism, public order, civil emergency, and the response to a cyber security incident. So as the ACC for operations, clearly I'm heavily involved in public order, the firearms uplift, civil emergencies, etc. But I also have Detective Superintendent Tim Martin with me from Counter-Terrorist Unit to support should there be any specific questions around that element. Other than that, sir, I'll take the report as read, and I'm happy to take any questions at all.
Thank you very much, Assistant Chief Constable. In that case, do we have any comments, questions or matters arising from the paper? I have one matter at least to kick things off in that case. Assistant Chief Constable, has West Midlands Police had any engagement to date with the National Strategic Policing Requirement Review? And do you have any update on the review at the moment, please?
Probably one I ought to touch on, Commissioner, I think, because I'm aware of the discussion that's going on. So the main area at the moment that's been dealt with by national leads, and I know this from the briefing at Chiefs Council, is obviously some expansion areas around the violence against women and girls areas around the SPR. I think that's been worked through at the moment. I think it is right and appropriate the SPR looks at a full range of key strategic threats. It is a document that we have to have due regard to. It's important it's not a document that describes a prescription of what we do, and I think national leads are working through getting the right balance on that. So there isn't anything specifically we've put through at the moment around that, and we'll remain engaged with it, but they're the main areas we're conscious of there's more of a debate on at the moment.
Thank you, Chief Constable. We have a question from Chief Executive Jonathan Jardine. Jonathan.
Great. Thank you very much, Commissioner, and thank you, Mike, for the report. Just as a point of clarification, just so in case anybody's wondering why it's not there, the report request that we submitted to West Midlands Police didn't mention the sixth area of the SPR, which is child sexual exploitation, as that is picked up in other reports that come to the board at other times. So it's a deliberate omission, because this collection of issues more happily sits together in a report, a single report. And on the subject of the SPR review, one of the areas I think that we've pushed very hard for is that a future SPR would look at what is one of the other key areas of the ACC operations portfolio, which is around roads policing. We have lobbied for a long time that the issues relating to roads policing and the need for a kind of coordinated approach across policing to the strategic roads network particularly is one that should be reflected in the SPR for all sorts of reasons. Just reflecting on questions then on this on the paper itself, looking at the paper, what the paper talks about in relation to the establishment of the counter-terrorism specialist firearms officers, it is clear the picture is improving, but it does seem to be both a regional, local and national issue around ensuring that there is a sufficient cadre of firearms officers, particularly at these more advanced levels. Are there opportunities? What is the overall approach to ensuring that we have as full a strength of these very specialist roles as possible? Are there opportunities for collaboration that might improve resilience? Are there other options in relation to collaboration with non-territorial forces that potentially could be explored? What's the approach to making sure we have a sufficient cadre there? And then I guess just the second area, reflecting on one of the bits of the SPR that I think is perhaps less well understood exactly what the expectations are on policing, certainly from my perspective, speaking personally, and that concerns the role of policing in relation to cyber incidents. It is, if one looks at the national threat register, the public version of the document, it talks about the risks associated with major cyber incidents and the potential for significant disruption, and it is very much near the top of the kind of risks that the nation faces, and there would clearly be a significant role for policing. What is the approach to the force and multi-agency training and exercising in relation to a major cyber incident, and are there protocols in place or understood protocols in place for the policing role in relation to such an incident were it to occur? Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. So just in relation to the CT armed uplift, I know you'll be aware that we are the only single force CTSFO hub nationally. which clearly creates some of its own challenges, but clearly also has some benefits for us as a police force. You'll also be aware that the pathway from an armed response vehicle role profile officer through to a CTSFO is quite an uplift in relation to impact on training, time away from home and specialism. And that also has a knock-on impact around the diversity and inclusion agenda, and then just broadening the diversity of our armed officers across the region and nationally. So Simon Chesterman, who's the National Police Chiefs Council lead for armed policing, is doing a national piece of work around attrition, particularly in the armed environment, not necessarily just CTSFOs, but actually across the armed policing role profile across each of the elements. And that work continues nationally, but also feeds in regionally. There is a number of pathway courses that we're working through in an effort to make it streamlined, slick, and to make sure that there is no vulnerability within the region. You'll note there that our establishment is 56. We're currently 9 under establishment within the region. But from the Armed Policing Portfolio Board that I chair, we're working closely with our regional colleagues around exposure, training and throughput. And we're confident that we will get close to at or around the establishment of 56 to support the hub establishment strength and delivery nationally. So work is ongoing. It's not a straightforward piece of work, and equally, what it isn't easy. It's not a quick piece of work either, because clearly some of the pathway courses can take over a year for an officer to achieve the relevant role profile with the right level of training. But there is a long-term plan in place, and I'm briefing into the exec very regularly around progress on that. So that's the CTR net lift piece. Just around the cyber, if you don't mind, I will hand you over to the Chief just to reference the cyber update, Jonathan.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. It's a really good one. I think in the context we're in, these things are always a kind of developing issue. As we've all probably seen over the last few weeks, because the issues around the Ukraine, this isn't just, malicious criminal organisations. There is increasing concerns about state actors in this place. So the NSCC, National Cybersecurity Centre, got that slightly the wrong way around, obviously have the ownership of the broader risk and issues that take place. The capabilities for law enforcement in this region are very much centred around the capabilities in the ROCU, which is where that response will be coordinated. And of course, the ROCU do support the work we do in trying to work with industry and commercial organisations around prevent. So I think those issues are there, and have been examples where denial of service attacks particularly have been responded to through that. The ROCU structures are nationally coordinated so that we can support each other around these issues. Those are currently the structure, but as you've mentioned, I think the National Cybercrime Strategy is developing more extensively, more issues in that space, and I think we would expect to keep the position under review as the type of capabilities that are needed. But it's very much a capability built around ROCUs at the moment.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable.
Can I come back just very quickly on a couple of things there?
Of course.
If that's okay. Sorry.
Yes, please
to interrupt. I guess in relation to the CTSFO position, one of the questions I meant to ask there, Mike, is relating to the funding for that. Is there security of funding around the uplift going forward? I know we've had some additional funding this year. What's your sense of that position into the future? And I guess in relation to thank you for the answer about the police's role in relation to cyber incidents. Does the response to cyber incidents feature in the exercise programme for the Local Resilience Forum and other civil contingencies mechanisms? Is that part of that programme?
So I think I'll just pick this up. So the funding issue, I think, is linked in with the broader settlement. We'll need to see some of the finer details on that, but there's been no debate in the structures about taking away the funding for the CTSFO issue because it is national. I think we've in consultation with the police settlement, as that's finalised out, we've no indications that's not going to be supported as an issue. In terms of the cyber resilience stuff, I think there's kind of two issues around this. So we've just done the Commonwealth Games paper. It's one of the areas that receives attention as part of the Commonwealth Games work both as a preventative issue, but also we will need to look around that. I am not entirely certain around the local resilience forum planning specifically on that issue, and I'd have to come back to you on that.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. Was there anything you wanted to follow up with arising out of that, Jonathan?
No, thank you, Commissioner. I mean, I guess the only other area that's always come up in these papers relates to public order. So while the uplift of police officers generally, doubtless, it will increase the capacity and resilience of the force in relation to a sustained public order incident, which is an issue that has arisen in previous reviews of the force's position in relation to the SPR. I guess the corollary question, though, that has arisen relates to the training programme for public order, given the disruption of COVID, and whether there is a confidence that the force is back on track to have that kind of resilience around a sustained public order requirement.
Thanks, Jonathan. So you'll be aware that there's still ongoing discussions around the Section 22 and the Midlands Regional Tactical Training Centre. However, we've been very well served by our learning and development colleagues in ensuring that essential training, face-to-face training, has continued. So whilst there has been a pause during last year's training regime, and it therefore created a bit of a lag, we're still at circa 90% of our 1,300 odd target figure. So we feel we're in a comfortable position. And again, looking at that uplift, looking at broader training requirements and uplifting capabilities across the force as that work progresses.
Thank you for that question, Jonathan, and for the response. I don't see anybody else indicating. I have a few questions, please. On the subject of serious and organised crime, there's reference in the paper to the uplift programme, suggesting that ROCU will continue to grow significantly over the next year. And I guess my question is in three parts. Firstly, will there be an increase in capabilities with the introduction of new officers? Secondly, is there anything we're not currently doing that will be looked at when these posts are filled? And thirdly, are there any additional capabilities ROCU is looking at exploring?
Thank you for the question, Commissioner. So the issue in relation to this is that as part of the discussions around uplift, ROCUs were included within that, and I think chiefs have agreed with the broad principle of this growth. The first year's worth of growth, I think, on the ROCU, I mean, it's relatively small, was more lifting capacity rather than new capabilities. There was a brief update a couple of weeks ago at Chiefs Council on the National Lead's work around potential areas of capability uplift that I think would be right and appropriate to be considered. That's not been put forward as a specific proposal at the moment, and we're very keen to work as part of a national system to look where that capability lift is. So I probably need to come back to you when we have more definition on that issue through the national work, because I think it does move into some new capability areas into the next 2 years of the programme. I think the ROCU piece is staggered over a slightly longer horizon than uplift. So uplift is very much focused in the next 12 months or so. The kind of final years coming up. But I think the acceptance is that you couldn't grow ROCU resources at that speed. And so what we'll need to do is look over a longer period. So there is definitely capability change, but it's not currently been, we're not in the position, I think, at the moment where we've had that passed through with some definition, but I will certainly share that with you.
Thank you, Chief Constable. My second question is how has the increased focus on county lines affected the ROCUs, and supplementary to that, what comparative evaluation, if any, has there been of the county lines task forces deployed in the Westlands as, say, compared to elsewhere?
Yeah, thank you. Very live question at the moment. So county lines describes the mechanism by which a number of drugs, organised crime groups, provide the ability to supply through mobile telephony drugs. It is often used as a term to describe gangs from urban areas supplying into more rural forces, but actually the same phenomenon is used within this conurbation as well, where drugs markets are used through telephony. We received a level of funding from the government to fund and create a county lines task force to tackle this particular phenomenon. It's important it is addressed for two reasons, really. One, of course, the harmful supply of drugs, but actually it is the violence and gang criminality that goes with this, and the exploitation of young people. And so the operations on county lines are very much about closing and disrupting the lines, but also about safeguarding young people and, of course, bringing people to prosecution. There were three forces funded around this, reflecting the national picture: London, Merseyside Police and ourselves, although the operating models were slightly different and was subject to a Home Office evaluation around them. The model in this region, we housed our county lines task force in the ROCU, even though it is West Midlands Police funding, and actually we have to use some of the money to fund forces that surround the West Midlands conurbation who actually have some of the county lines. So we dealt with it as slightly more of a regional effect. Our funding position was different than some of the other forces in this, because the approach we used was not just a kind of straightforward catch and convict, but we looked to use some disruption tactics around the mobile phones and do more on that. And there was a deliberate attempt to evaluate the West Midlands, the Merseyside and the London models to try and ensure we looked at the best kind of value for money, bearing in mind the version trialled here was a lower cost version. The evaluations, I think, have been very helpful. It's shown where the model we use works well. It's equally shown that what value could be achieved by increasing the amount of resources devoted into the catch and convict strand. The areas around the diversion and safeguarding work, I think, were very strong in this region. So there is a revised consolidator model. The force is currently putting forward a bid for additional funding. That additional funding will put us in a position where we retain the work we currently do, but there is expanded capacity around bringing people to justice. And the area I think we are wanting to close is that in one of the other forces have been particularly successful in being, in effect, trial ready at charge, so that there was no release on bail or pending investigation. We're not at the same level of that here. At the moment, it does require more capacity to do that. And so the evaluation is being used by the Home Office to reshape the funding that will go into individual forces. So we're very happy with that. I think we can, if that's not been shared with your office, we can share the evaluation. It's very helpful, but it is forming the basis of the revised bid the force is putting in.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. One question on counter-terrorism. I noticed there's reference to the overall establishment at 92% at the moment. Are we likely to maintain that over the coming financial year? And is there any succession planning and recruitment being undertaken to consider broadening the entry routes to counter-terrorism policing at the moment?
Yes, thank you for the question. So counter-terrorism policing, while we have a CTU and we also lead national work around this area, regional work around this area. Oh, well. So we might have gone into the dark. It's just the lights have gone off here. We'll have to jump around for a bit. The work we do as a region, we lead the regional partnership. We have a national counter-terrorism hub, but as you're aware, counter-terrorism policing is very much dealt with as a national structure around the way we work as well. I sit on the counter-terrorism coordinating committee. We've been looking at this issue because there is a pipeline that we need to have to succession plan effective in this area. That is a national one because some of the jobs are national roles, not just local ones. So we have been working through that work. The type of work we've looked at, the recruitment programme we're doing here in the West Midlands, we are recruiting some direct entry police officer investigators at degree level. We're very keen to look at fast-tracking some of those into the CTU roles. We are debating at Counter-Terrorism Coordinating Committee whether or not a national scheme could exist in that particular area where we recruit very much for people who want to work in counter-terrorism policing. We succession plan and we look very carefully around who will move into key roles. So we are currently in the process of succession planning the current head of the unit to transition them through, and we do vacancy monitoring at a national level. I'm relatively comfortable where we are at the moment, but there will be more work and focus on this, particularly as far as counter-terrorism policing meets uplift. So it is quite a complex issue. We do give it a lot of attention. I'm reasonably comfortable where we are as a region on this, but there probably will be more national innovation around it.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. One final question from me around public order. I'd be very happy for you, Chief Constable, or any of your colleagues to pick this up. In general terms, what's your assessment of the force's ability to sustain large-scale public order operations at the moment? And are there any particular challenges faced by West Midlands Police in sustaining large-scale public order operations, would you say?
Over to you.
Thank you, Commissioner. At the moment, I make an assessment that we're in a good place around that. So you'll note that we currently provide 55% of the regional public order capability, but we actually overtrain. So NPOC give us a bit of a baseline level in relation to the level of public order trained officers we should have within the force and or the region, and we overtrain to 3 times over our regional establishment or requirement. The reason for that is because the majority of our public order officers sit within BAU functionality. So what we need to be able to do is deliver BAU and respond to a public order incident. We're working very closely with the region and NPOC around potential risks and issues around public order. At the moment, nationally, the top 3 relate to environmental activism, anti-government protest and football. Particularly within the West Midlands, 2 of those are relevant for us. And that's probably the environmental activism piece and then the football piece. And we're doing a lot of work again nationally and regionally with academic researchers and the region around ensuring our capability, tactics, intelligence and strategies are all appropriate and fit for purpose. So I think we're in a good place, but I'm hopeful we'll be in an even stronger place in the next 12 months.
Thank you very much, Assistant Chief Constable. I don't think we have any further questions for you. So it just remains for me to say thank you so much for attending and presenting your report this morning, and also thank you to your colleague, I think, was it Chief Superintendent Tim Robbins? Did I catch that name correctly?
Yeah, Tim's been here. Yes, he's valuable in the room.
Yes. No, well, thank you for attending as well. It's much appreciated. Thank you very much for that report and presentation. So I just say in conclusion, in connection with that agenda item, protest, as we've heard, has been a growing source of demand for Westminster Police. The police have a role to play in order to facilitate lawful and peaceful assembly, but of course this must be balanced with the need to ensure public order and to keep the peace. I'm particularly concerned about the ongoing threat of anti-vaccine protests. I note that Westminster Police are engaged in an ongoing review of the need to enhance the force and regional capability for protest removal teams in view of an anticipated increase in the form of protest that might require this type of enhanced capability. Agenda item 9, Chief Constable update. This item is to be presented by the Chief Constable. It's an update on operational policing matters that can be discussed in the public domain. So over to you, please, Chief Constable.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. There's only really 2 areas I want to just touch on today as part of broader interest. I did want to pick up on the siege at Coventry that you mentioned in your introduction today, because I do think it is important to touch on this. So first and foremost, I'd like to thank the public for their support, particularly the local community in Aylesden, for their huge support for the operation that was needed to be carried out. It was disruptive to many residents and businesses. It was disruptive to local school. I am incredibly impressed how they took that in their stride and worked with us, and were incredibly understanding, and that isn't taken for granted. I know certainly we're looking at ways to try and ensure that our gratitude is conveyed, because it is so important. I clearly can't talk about the precise details in a public forum, because that's quite rightly, there are private matters and matters for investigation, but it is fair to say That was a extremely complicated operation. It's probably one of the longest, if not the longest, operation of the current siege management arrangements done by a force in the country at the moment. Very different set of circumstances, some clear risks, and as people can imagine, given the age of a child that was involved there, the child's welfare was at the forefront of the work they're doing. I think I would just like to, thank those who led the operation, the commanders, the staff who worked tirelessly, I think, throughout the entire period that operation was taking place. It was very disruptive to them, but at the same time, we carried on doing business around West Midlands Police. We will be doing, I think, a national debrief around that work because there's national learning, a huge amount of good practice, but actually that extended area, and I think it's a good indication to the public how national policing works. So we will be debriefing, for example, our negotiation approaches, what we learned from that, the expertise we brought in to support that negotiation. We'll also be doing a lot of debriefing around some of the firearms stuff from both our planning and our tactical areas. Again, there's some rich learning, I think, for policing around that, and it will be supported by the College of Policing so that policing as a whole benefits and continues to learn from events like this, because we are individual forces, but on these areas we work together very well. And the final area, we did receive some support, I think, from national forces around firearms capability, so in due course we'll be saying thank you for the extended hours that a number of staff worked across the country as part of the national effort. The final area I just wanted to touch on was, around crime threats and issues, was around vehicle crime. So vehicle crime, I think, is a growing area of concern for the force and the work we are doing at the moment, and is receiving more of our attention. That we recognise that crime is evolving significantly around where we're doing. Yes, more people are working from home, but fewer and fewer of the commodities in our home are as attractive, which is the reason why we think, one of the reasons why burglary is falling, as well as clearly the work we do to target burglars. However, vehicles there are a number of factors that are driving this: the shortage of semiconductors, the shortage of vehicle availability, and enhanced technology that can combat keyless vehicles. And while manufacturers, I think, have moved at pace over the last few 2-3 years, a number of older vehicles with keyless technology are very, very vulnerable. And we are seeing an increase in people using relay theft, which is electronic systems to either intercept the signal between the key and a vehicle, or also using some of the data port accesses that are used to diagnose vehicle engine management systems as a means of bypassing the vehicles. Very few, a lot of vehicles are now being stolen with keyless technology. And there will be a considerable amount of work done by the force to target people who are involved in this. There is a level of organised crime involved. Clearly, there is a concern some of these vehicles may be attractive because of a global shortage of vehicles. But we also know, and we've put some stuff out the last week, a number of these are also being broken in scrap yards and scrap yards, wrong expression, scrap locations or garage areas across the conurbation. So really what I'd ask the public to do, I think, is a number of things. The first is to look at your own vehicle security very tightly. It's important to look at recommended security products to store vehicle keys, particularly if your vehicle is a kind of slightly older vehicle, not an immediately new one, but equally be very careful around those. Keyless vehicles, there's something about storage of the vehicle keys in Faraday bags that actually gives some security protection. Second issue is what you can do to immobilise the vehicle itself in terms of vehicle steering locks. There are a number on the market, secure by design, that actually isolate and make the steering of the vehicle difficult to do. They all inhibit the ease at which a vehicle can be targeted and accessed. The third issue is suspicious behaviour around vehicles and reporting. Groups, individuals, vehicle registration numbers of cars that are seen cruising around and looking at vehicles is always welcome. But also suspicious behaviour, lockups, factory units, locations where vehicles may be taken to and broken apart. It doesn't require very sophisticated technology, but if there is suspicious items in terms of vehicles going to locations or detritus from vehicles being broken up, we are very, very keen. We use the expression shop a chop shop. but a number of these are used in locations where we need to be attentive, and if we can find those locations, it helps us greatly. There is quite a lot of work going on around this. For most people, this is the if not the first, the second most expensive item they'll buy in their lives. We take that very, very seriously. But as people will be aware, the shortage of vehicles and the shortage of vehicle parts is creating an economy of interest in this area. So vehicle crime has risen in the last month quite sharply. It is subject to quite a lot of attention, but we'd ask for the public's help, I think, in trying to combat this phenomenon so that we can actually make it a huge disincentive for people to become involved in that crime. I think the main areas I would want to cover off, Commissioner, at the moment, and I'm very grateful for the public's help on that latter point.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable, for that operational update. Agenda item 10 is the Strategic Policing and Crime Board Work Plan. This consists of the work plan and actions and future lines of inquiry, which are both simply for noting today. However, there are currently 5 matters that remain outstanding, and they'll remain on the actions and future lines of inquiry until they've been completed. Agenda item 11 is the date of the next meeting, which will be Tuesday, 22nd of February 2022. So that completes the agenda for this meeting of the Strategic Policing and Crime Board. I want to thank everyone who's attended today, and in particular members of the board, the Chief Constable, police officers and staff, representatives from the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, and members of the public for attending. It's much appreciated. I therefore formally declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Bye.